February 18th, live trading, San Diego. We got the Lowe's Coronado. I mean, what else would you want? This event is limited to 50 people. Look at your calendar, clear it, make sure you show up. If you want to be a rebel, this is the place to be. You got to sign up for it now. Giddy up, baby.
Bang.
Bang indeed.
Yep. Still don't have my clapper, Pete. It's back in Chicago. I'll pick it up on the trip back there.
I think you ought to order up another one and have one down in Puerto Rico and one wherever the heck you are, Chicago,
I
New York.
did that, but the one that came to Chicago was kind of crappy. So I traveled with the other one, and of course I forgot it. I might have to leave the crappy one down here just so I have a backup. But welcome, folks. This is the Rebel's Edge, the first Rebel's Edge of 2023. And we welcome all of you. We're going to discuss some stocks, our reaction to the headlines that are moving those stocks, as well as unusual activity, and maybe a little bit of sports thrown in right at the end. Lots to talk about in all of those areas, Pete. And of course, he's Pete Najarian. I'm John Najarian, and Jared is working the board and making sure the magic happens, that you can hear us and see us and all that fun stuff. All right, Pete, 1 minute macro. Ready?
Let's do it. Yeah.
Bang. All right, 1 minute macro. China reopening, lots of people getting sick, not a lot of people dying so far. That's a good thing, but it's also going to put more demand on a lot of stuff, Pete. And I think for right now, that's one of the things I'm focused on. How about you?
And early on, we haven't talked about this in a while, John, but early on, how about the fact that the dollar is starting to make a pretty nice move to the upside, up about 1% today, at least early on. It seemed like that was part of the turn, along with two huge news stories that we're going to talk about next. But it's Tesla, it's Apple, and the effects from them are macro. And we're seeing a lot of that play out right now.
Yep, he's right, folks. Beginning with number one story for us, Tesla. Boy, anytime a former trillion-dollar company, because it was briefly a trillion-dollar company, and Elon Musk is the first man to ever lose $200 billion, Pete. That's a headline that's circulating around. Tesla's down 10% today. So there's very little chance you're going to see Tesla down 10% and the S&P and or NASDAQ not be down with it, Pete.
Right. Oh, the reaction is unbelievable. And a lot of that reasoning, John, is these delivery numbers. They were phenomenal, but they missed what the projections were. And that's the problem. Anytime when those numbers are below whatever they projected out there, that seems to have a huge impact. They were looking for 405,000 EVs that they put out. They were looking for 418. They put out 405. And that seemed to be the big issue, John. And they talked about the number of units. And you and I were just talking before we came on. Boy, they produced 1.3 million units, right? I mean, that's a monster number. And you and I were laughing about, well, what's Ford's total EV number since they've jumped into the EV world? And I think you said they might have 22,000, 25,000, something like that. But when you look at that, John, they were looking, and it was up 40% year over year on that. That's a big number, but they were looking for 50%. So that's the problem. I think those are actually end up being good problems. Although I will say this, very first trade of unusual options today, they were buying puts in Tesla. It was trading 114. Now it's trading 106, maybe 105. So it gives you a little idea. The unusual options was right on this, dead on this, on those 5,500 puts they bought.
Yep. And a lot of it was that Morgan Stanley analyst, Pete, cut his estimates. They haven't had any good news at Tesla in a very long time. Although I will point out 1.3 million deliveries for the year. That will probably blow everybody else except the Chinese EV makers, Pete. That'll blow everybody else away for years before they get to any kind of numbers like that. But let's move on. Square, This one used to be called Square. Now it's called Block. The symbol is still SQ, but early on it was up 6%. But like a lot of things, Pete, it sort of slided away. Right now it is basically unchanged. It gave up that 6% rally. They got an upgrade from an analyst. A year ago, they bought this Afterpay company out of Australia. It's one of those buy now, pay later companies like Affirm and so forth. Well, that's not working out so swell for them. In fact, by the time they closed the deal, Pete, the stock was only worth half of what they agreed to pay.
It's unbelievable. I mean, they just can't get anything right, John. The fact that they changed the name from Square to Block because of blockchain was really probably found about the worst timing of all time. I mean, you couldn't have done something worse. And when you look at the performance of this stock, you know, their gross profits, they actually look pretty good. But overall, John, they've got the monthly active users, that's not really growing right now. So they've got a lot of issues. And I think just the fact that they've put themselves into a position to be in the world of crypto in a big way by even changing the name. And you and I have seen a lot of different name changes over the years, but it's just an interestingly poor strategy, I would say, by the upper management of what was Square. And I think that's the big problem that they face. They are now related to that world. And by being related to that right now, now's not the time. It hasn't been the time for the last 6-7 months. I don't know when it's going to loosen up, but that's still an area where people say, oh, you're in crypto? Huh, hands off.
Yeah, it was 141 bucks last year, folks, the beginning of 2022. Now in the low 60s. So yeah, I think Pete's right. The only thing comparable, Pete, is Meta. As far as Zuckerberg deciding, yeah, let me change Facebook and let me pick the metaverse because I'm killing it there. And instead he killed his stock. All right, Apple. This is the other big reason, the multi-trillion-dollar reason that the market can't get out of its own way today, Pete, because when you have Apple falling as it has today, you're not going to see the market rallying. I mean, Apple's down 4.25%. It's trading at the low of the day, about 124.50, right around there. And boy, opened 130.25 and then just zoom to the downside, basically allegedly offering or telling their suppliers, we don't need as much supply as we thought.
Yeah. Those lines are never good, John, because that says a lot about what they perceive to be the demand. And they're talking about the suppliers. They go, hey, look, we need a lot less. That's terrible. That is not what you want to hear. And that's not normally something you'd hear from Apple, but it is. And I would say this, I don't know if we've got the chart, Jared, or not, but if we do, our own Brian McCormick sent this to me earlier today. And John, what this chart is saying is, wow, this is a red alert. It is dropped down lower, down lower, down lower. And it's at these levels where he's concerned it could break even further from here. That it's got to find some legs at some point in time. This was a $2 trillion company plus, and now 25 months later, we are on the lows of the last, call it 25 months. This is a stock that's under some huge pressure. We love Apple. We understand the products. Everybody does. But if demand is that slow, John, that's going to be a problem, and that's going to affect the earnings.
Yep. Stock was 184.94 on the highs. And now it's 124. So that's obviously $60, Pete, out of that company. So no surprise that it goes from 3 trillion back down to 2 trillion. And today it broke through 2 trillion to 1.98 right now, trillion dollars. All right. Well, GDS, we don't talk a lot about this one, but it was worth citing today because it's a big data center and service operator over for internet companies, in particular, Pete, in China. So, you know, you could pick your Chinese stock that you wanted to talk about today. A lot of them moving up. And a lot of that is because of what we talked about at the top. China is reopening. This is not a joke. They are reopening. And even though people are getting sick, they're not dying in the big numbers. And so for that reason, and the fact that demand is so huge, a lot of these Chinese stocks still moving to the upside. I'll have one of those for you in unusual, in fact, Pete.
Well, yep, and I'm looking forward to that because I know where you're going with that. John, since October, this stock has gone from a $9.60 stock to today, and it was trading over 24 bucks. I mean, this has been a really impressive run that we've watched here for a while now. And to your point, and it all has to do with what China is telling us, at least, if they're telling us the truth. I don't know how many people out there believe what they're telling us when they only like to cherry pick, John. When it's something that's good, they're like, oh yeah, these guys are dead on. But if it's something else, it's like, no, hell no, I'm not listening to these guys. They're communists. Well, the truth of it is they're always communists. They will be communists. And right now, when they talk about peak COVID and all this improvement, that's why we are seeing all these Chinese names, not just one or two, but NetEase and Baidu and PDD and JD and all of them skyrocketing today, ripping to the upside. That's the only thing that's buoying the NASDAQ right now is a lot of these Chinese names, John, that are actually having a really good day.
Yep, very true. And, until and unless we hear differently from China, reopening is going to be the name of the game. Yep. All right, Pete, I promised you unusual activity in a Chinese name, and I've got it again. You and I have seen multiple hits for KWeb, FXI, and a number of the stocks like ASHR, anything China related. For the last basically month, it's just been buy, buy, buy. And in this case, KWeb is the one that they're buying. This is, the internet stocks in China. So it's not every big cap stock, but it's internet stocks like Alibaba. And this one is moving up fast. They're buying the January 13th expiration. So that's not this Friday, but that's next Friday expiration in January, 32 calls. Those calls were right at the money, Pete, meaning that the stock was trading at roughly 31.98. Good enough for government work, I guess, 32 bucks. But they bought a ton of those calls, and I liked the trade. They also sold a bunch of the higher strike calls at the 37 strike. I think this is a good play. As long as you want to bet on China reopening, it doesn't put you in just one stock. You get a broad swath of those internet stocks in China.
Yep, I think that's great, John. And we have seen a lot of this option paper come into some of these names at various times. And those ETFs from China seem to be very, very dominantly represented there. I got an ETF as well. I don't like doing it. You don't like doing it. We like to go directly to stocks. But this was just too big and too important, John. I'm looking at the spider. It's up on the screen now. Early in the day, when we were at the highs of the day, 386, a little bit higher than 386 on the spider, we had a monster buyer step in, John, on the put side. And now look at how well they're already doing, because now the spider's trading at 378. It was 386 at the time of this trade, actually a little higher than that. And they were buying the 368 puts at 30,000 of them for a little over $5. They're selling the 364 puts for the people who care to know the whole trade. So there's a spread going on there. It's a $4 spread. They're paying a little bit less than $1 for this. That fits into what you talk about, what I talk about, risk reward. When you do put on a spread, you want at least to have a multiple of 3 or more. This fits into that category. It actually was a cost of 90 cents, 510 against 420. 30,000 of these trading, looking for downside. John, they're already getting downside. And if we continue on this path at all in this early part of 2023, these things could really kick in. I loved seeing this one. This was very, very interesting. I only loved it because it fits so many categories for anybody who's got any bearishness at all. And that turn in Tesla, that turn in Apple, and the turn in the markets, the spider is definitely reflecting that right now.
Yep. And folks, 2 quick things. 1, 3 million share equivalent, because every option is for 100 shares. So 30,000 options. Sorry, I held up 4 fingers. 30,000 options. That is 3 million share equivalent. The other thing, these are February options, folks. So if they were looking for just the market to go down in a flash, they would have bought short-term options. Sadly, they're buying options out more than 30 days into the future, more like 45 days into the future. So this means that this big trader thought that the market might be accelerating to the downside for a while. So,
Yep.
but
Extending
like
that
Pete
time.
said, it's a spread at least.
Mm-hmm.
It's, 368 versus 364, that 4-point spread. But yeah, I love the risk reward there, Pete. All right. Let's hit a little bit of sports. There was certainly a lot of that since the last time we did Rebels Edge last week. What do you got? Are you on NFL or college?
Well, I think we start off with college football, John, just because there's a lot debate going on. I don't think there's any debate at all. I think the NCAA is making a huge mistake because all they do is run for the money, right? It's a money grab that they want in 2024. They will have a 12-game playoff. Why are they going to do that? Are there really 12 teams that you could argue should be in the playoff? I don't think so. And when you've got 4, I think that represents exactly what you need. Now, somebody might be looking out and saying, well, but what about this? Here's the other teams that missed this year, John. Bama, Tennessee, Clemson, Utah, K-State, USC, Penn State, and Washington. The only real argument of any of those teams could be Bama. But you know what, Bama? You lost 2 games. That means you're out because in college football, every game counts. And that's why it's great that there's a 4-team playoff. And what did we get? We got the best playoff we've ever seen since this started. You had Michigan and TCU, 2 great football teams, played really sloppy football, 6 turnovers together. They combined for 1,000 yards. They had 13 penalties, but it was an absolutely exciting game from start to finish. In Ohio State, Georgia, exactly the same thing, except they had 1,000+ yards of offense. But they weren't sloppy. They had 8 penalties that were pretty meaningless, 1 turnover, and the game came down to the final kick, and the guy shanked it. He's going to be regretting that for Ohio State for the rest of his life. So does Georgia really deserve to be in the final? Of course they do. But they could be sitting on the outside right now, John, going, son of a gun. We let these guys put 500 yards on us. The quarterback threw for 400 yards and 5 touchdowns, and they still lost. So I think they got the right teams in place, but this money grab is going to be a huge debacle, I think, John, when they go to 12. How did you perceive the games that you saw?
Well, you just recapped those 2. The fact that, Ohio State and Georgia, that's 1,300 yards of offense, means neither team can play defense. I realize, when you get extended play and things like that, you get sometimes much higher yardage figures and scores and things like that. But there's a reason. And so I feel bad for that kicker. I feel bad for USC, Pete, because Tulane, who plays in a conference that very few of us can even name.
I can't. I can't.
Came back and beat USC, the Heisman Trophy winner. And it wasn't that he had a bad game. I think Caleb had a good game.
Great.
But my gosh, Tulane to go toe-to-toe with a team that's just raided the portal and got all these studs in there, and all of a sudden they stormed back with 14 points and beat them out of nowhere. That was one that I'm sure Tulane will be thinking about, talking about, and people will be taking that team a lot more seriously, Pete, going forward. It's where my daughter went, so I've got a soft spot in my heart for it, and I also have never really loved USC, so it was kind of fun to watch them get beat like that.
All of that for all the right reasons, John, especially the USC hate, because let me tell you something. Those scumbags went out there and paid for every one of these athletes. They still lost 2 games, which is why they didn't get in to the playoff. And it shows me how soft the damn Pac-12 really is. They're just soft as freaking marshmallows. They go out throughout their season, play each other with a bunch of pillows, and then they finally realize, you know what? We're going to go into a bowl game and lose to freaking Tulane, who's going to put up 300 yards rushing against us, 10 yards a carry, John, and then they get outscored 32-17 in the second half. I mean, that should be embarrassing. And I'm not disparaging anything about Tulane, but if you're USC, let me ask you something. If you're an NIL delivering financial aid to those guys, are you going to stick around for that crap? Really? Okay, so we ran through all these other games, but we get here in Tulane. And I'm not talking, I mean, it's like Toledo. Who do you want to lose to? I mean, I think that was brutal. Here's one for you, John. Let's jump to the NFL real quick. So, the NFL, we're getting to the final week. We're going to the final week this week. There are 5 teams in the AFC who are not, they are eliminated. Everybody else in the AFC is still possible for the playoffs. The NFC's got 7 that are eliminated. The rest are ready for the playoffs. I mean, these are amazing numbers. It shows you that parity does work. I think the NFL, to their credit, has done a great job on a few things. They've done a terrible job on many, but they've done a great job on some things, which is, how do you get this so that teams like Jacksonville get good and you give them those opportunities, right? Through the draft, getting early picks, all those kinds of things. And it's just done an amazing job. And they are so equal this year. It's scary. There are teams that are better than other teams, but there's no doubt that there's a lot closer grouping than we've ever seen before. And I was just going to say, of all the games this coming week, John, that I think the most amazing one, the Detroit Lions, if they can beat Green Bay, now that's a huge if. They usually go there and lay an egg. The Green Bay Packers got them when they're in, Lambeau Field. But if they can go there and win that game, John, those guys have a great opportunity to get into the playoffs and really maybe get somewhere. Now, on the other side of it, Aaron Rodgers, you know what? All he does is win when he gets his mindset and he gets off all that frog venom and all that bullshit that he was doing. but they're on a roll, and they took the Vikings to the house this weekend. So they're rolling, but Detroit's rolling. I think that is the game of the week for me as we get into the playoffs.
Yeah. And it's always cool when you see a team that plays indoors, like the Vikings or Detroit, Pete, go outdoors. Now, when the Vikings went outdoors against the Packers, they can't blame the weather because it was not zero with or below zero with a below zero wind chill. It was none of those things. Mm-hmm. It was, only late in the game you could even see the player's breath, which basically means it got down around 32. So, if it's not just icy cold, it's not going to affect Detroit. If it's really, really cold, it does affect indoor teams. I don't care who you are. But I will say that I like the way they're playing. I like the way Jared Goff has been leading that team.
Stud.
And, they've got some pretty good. You talked about that kid from Michigan last year, Pete, that they picked up. He has been a phenom for the Detroit Lions. And that's one of the weak spots, by the way, for Green Bay Packers, is that they still have an offensive line that's banged up. They always do, it seems. But, at least for now, our friend has been able to get things done, Pete.
Yeah, it's been great, and a great football season. The Vikings are in trouble, John. They lost their right tackle. He's out now. They lost their starting center. They lost their second string center. That's a problem. We saw that reflected in the game. So the Vikings are kind of going down the drain a little bit when you lose some of those key elements on the front offensive line, where you obviously need a quarterback who can throw the ball. He can throw the ball, but he needs a little bit of time back there, which he has none of. The last thing we got, John, and it's the saddest thing ever, and we all watched it last night. Many people are familiar with it, but Damar Hamlin. I mean, what can you say about this young man at 25 years old and how scary everything looked? It was frightening. It was sad. There were tears everywhere. They canceled the game. They at first, just paused it, and then they canceled it. And I don't know how they're going to play this thing out, John. I really don't, as far as the NFL. But that's the least of our worries. I mean, all the prayers in the world for this young man, because that's probably the scariest thing I've ever seen. And you always wondered in the NFL, are we ever going to see something like this? And, fortunately we haven't. But this was just an awful situation. And sad as could be, but certainly our prayers go out for everybody, including all the players on both sides that showed you that they truly are great human beings on how they approach this whole thing, the prayers that they were doing, and understanding how brutal this situation was.
Yeah. Certainly, Pete. And I'm just looking at the latest update just 51 minutes ago, and he's still stable, but critical condition because, of course, they did have to restart his heart on the field. I mean, he had a cardiac arrest. That means stop. His heart stopped. But boy, people just kind of showed their true colors also, Pete, by donating $4 million now. This is not for his medical care, folks. This is for his charity that he was buying toys for kids. And he was raising money himself. And now people saw that he was doing that. And they have now contributed $4 million to that charity. Again, that's not for his treatment. That is for kids that he has donated these toys and so forth. And it's pretty heartwarming to see that and the outpouring of support from the fans, as well as, I'm sure, a number of players, Pete. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah. Yep. Sad, but man, it's the NFL, and it's these guys are unbelievable. Their athleticism, everything else. But yeah, again, our prayers go out for Damar and his family and everybody else involved. I mean, it's just a brutal situation that, you know what, you always wondered if a day like this would come, and here it is, and it doesn't feel good.
True. Well, folks, we've got 2 more Rebels Edge this week. We will be back tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern time. We encourage you to join us for that. We've got some surprises coming your way in the very near future. So thank you for all your support. Make sure you check out our YouTube channel. On YouTube, you just type in Market Rebellion in the search bar, and you can subscribe for free to 3,000 plus videos that we've got up there. And like I say, a lot of surprises coming your way in 2023. Thanks for all the support. We'll see you tomorrow at 1.